The city burned in the distance, smoke rising in thick columns against the twilight sky. The air smelled of scorched concrete and ozone, remnants of yet another failed counterattack. Sergeant Ethan Hayes lay prone atop a shattered skyscraper, his rifle stock pressed firmly against his shoulder, his eye fixed through the scope. Below, alien foot soldiers, Zenrath as intelligence had labeled them, moved with mechanical precision, their massive forms encased in smooth, iridescent armor that shimmered like liquid metal under the setting sun. Ethan's finger hovered over the trigger. He found a target, a Zenrath commander standing amidst a formation of foot soldiers, issuing orders in their guttural, unreadable tongue. He exhaled slowly, steadied his shot, and fired. The bullet struck dead center, only to splinter harmlessly against the alien's armor. The Zenrath didn't even flinch. They didn't turn toward him. Didn't react at all. "Jesus Christ," muttered Corporal James Carter, his spotter watching through his binoculars. "They don't even notice us." Ethan's jaw tightened. It wasn't the first time. He had taken dozens of shots, each with the same result. His team had relocated 3 times today, hoping for a better angle, a better chance. Nothing. The Zenrath ignored bullets like they were a mild breeze against their armor. It was humiliating. Worse, it was useless. "Command wants us to keep engaging," Carter said, but the lack of conviction in his voice made it clear he knew how pointless it was. Ethan shifted his focus, scanning the battlefield. Human soldiers were being cut down in waves, their assault rifles barely denting the Zenrath's forces. Tanks were reduced to molten husks by searing plasma bolts. The invaders advanced methodically, sweeping through the city with unwavering confidence. It had been like this for weeks. Earth had prepared for an invasion. Satellite defenses, orbital weapons platforms, missile strikes. None of it had stopped the Zenrath from making landfall. Now the war had turned into a desperate ground battle and humanity was losing. Ethan's earpiece crackled to life. "Sierra 2, hold your position," came the voice of Captain Rhodes, calm but edged with tension. "We're sending someone up. Stay put." Minutes later, a figure emerged from the stairwell, moving quickly across the broken rooftop. Dr. Rachel Vasquez wasn't military, but she carried herself like someone who belonged here. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she wore a reinforced vest over her civilian clothes. She was carrying a long, slim case. "You're the sniper team up here?" she asked, glancing between Ethan and Carter. "Last I checked," Carter said, lowering his binoculars. "Not that it makes much difference." "It's about to," Vasquez said, kneeling and popping open the case. Inside, cushioned in dark foam, was something Ethan had never seen before. A rifle, sleek and angular, without a visible muzzle or traditional barrel. The entire weapon looked experimental, too advanced for standard issue. "What is that?" Ethan asked, intrigued despite himself. "A game changer." She lifted the weapon carefully, adjusting its weight. "You've noticed their armor, haven't you? You mean how it shrugs off 50 cal rounds like pebbles?" Carter said. "Exactly." Vasquez's expression darkened. "The Zenrath's armor isn't just strong. It's adaptive. It neutralizes kinetic force by absorbing the bullet's energy across its entire structure. That's why conventional firearms are useless." "Then what the hell are we supposed to do?" Ethan asked. "You stop using conventional firearms," Vasquez said simply. She placed the weapon into Ethan's hands. It was unnervingly light. "This is a prototype silent railgun system. Fires a ferromagnetic projectile at hypersonic speeds, too fast for their armor to distribute the impact. No gunpowder, no muzzle flash, no sound." Carter let out a low whistle. "And this thing works?" Vasquez's expression was unreadable. "That's what you're about to find out." Ethan studied the weapon, adjusting his position. "What's the range?" "Better than your current rifle," Vasquez said. "And if it works, we change the course of this war." "No pressure then." Ethan sat up, scanning for a target. The Zenrath commander was still standing in the open, issuing orders, completely unaware that something new had entered the battlefield. Ethan steadied his breathing. The rifle had no recoil, no familiar weight shift as he fired. There was nothing, just the moment of stillness, the squeeze of the trigger, and then the Zenrath commander collapsed, a clean hole punched through the alien's armor, straight through the chest. The body fell motionless. The soldiers around it paused, momentarily confused. "Holy shit," Carter whispered. The Zenrath still weren't reacting. They hadn't seen or heard the shot. Ethan adjusted his scope, lined up another soldier, and fired. Another body dropped. This time the Zenrath noticed. They didn't know where the shots were coming from, but panic rippled through their ranks. Their invulnerability had been shattered. Vasquez exhaled, a rare glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. Now they bleed, she said. Ethan shifted position, scanning for more targets. The war had changed in an instant. And for the first time since the invasion began, Earth had struck back. The body hit the ground before the Zenrath even realized what had happened. The commander's collapse sent a ripple through the ranks, but there was no explosion, no telltale muzzle flash. Just sudden, inexplicable death. Ethan adjusted his aim, lined up another shot and fired. Another Zenrath fell, a small hole punched cleanly through its helmet. The others hesitated now, scanning their surroundings with unreadable expressions. For the first time since the invasion began, they didn't look invincible. They looked uncertain. Carter let out a low chuckle. Would you look at that? They don't like dying. Vasquez tapped her earpiece. I'm transmitting the data now. If this works in multiple locations, we may have just found their weakness. The radio crackled as Captain Rhodes responded. Multiple teams are confirming kills. Whatever you just gave them, it's working. Keep hitting them. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He moved his scope, scanning for officers, anything that resembled a chain of command. The Zenrath didn't wear obvious ranks, but their leaders stood differently, gave orders with subtle gestures rather than brute force. He found another one, a tall figure gesturing toward a cluster of human soldiers trapped behind a wrecked transport. One silent shot later, and the Zenrath leader dropped, its command cut short. The effect was immediate. The foot soldiers hesitated, confused. The humans seized the opportunity, opening fire and driving the aliens back. This is working, Vasquez murmured, almost in disbelief. We're actually pushing them back. Across the city, other sniper teams joined the fight, each one armed with the same silent weapons. Reports came in: London, Tokyo, Moscow, Sydney. Wherever the new sniper rifles were deployed, the Zenrath faltered. Their armor had made them arrogant, but without it, they were just soldiers. And soldiers could be killed. The war changed overnight. The Zenrath adapted quickly. At first, they simply tried to move faster, keeping their formations tight and mobile, but that only made them easier targets. Snipers picked them off one by one, whittling down their numbers in coordinated strikes. Without their usual dominance, they struggled to maintain control. Then the real countermeasures began. Zenrath drones took to the skies, sweeping the ruins with advanced sensors. They couldn't hear the shots, but they could detect heat signatures, movement patterns, anything that might indicate a human sniper's position. In one brutal hour, 3 sniper teams were located and wiped out before they even realized they'd been spotted. Ethan's team relocated constantly, never staying in one place long enough to risk discovery. But the Zenrath were learning. They adapted their armor, layering it with new plating that could absorb higher impact projectiles. The silent shot still worked, but not as cleanly. Some Zenrath took multiple hits before they went down. More troubling was their shift in tactics. They stopped exposing their officers, forcing the snipers to take riskier shots. And when they did, the Zenrath responded with devastating force, leveling entire buildings if they suspected a sniper was inside. We need to move, Carter said, eyes locked on a Zenrath patrol sweeping the street below. They had already taken out 2 squads today, but their last position had been compromised. Ethan nodded, packing up his rifle. Vasquez had already mapped an escape route, leading them through the skeletal remains of a collapsed high-rise. The trio moved quickly, darting through the ruins, keeping low. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a search drone. Ethan froze, pressing against the rubble as the sleek, disc-like machine passed overhead. It hovered for a moment, scanning, then moved on. He let out a slow breath. They're getting faster, Vasquez whispered. Yeah, Carter muttered. And smarter. Reaching their new position, Ethan set up again, scanning the battlefield. The humans were winning, slowly, painfully, but it was happening. The Zenrath, once unstoppable, were retreating in key locations. But something felt wrong. He adjusted his scope, searching beyond the main battle lines. Zenrath forces were pulling back, yes, but not in the chaotic retreat he had expected. They were regrouping. Consolidating. They had realized brute force wouldn't win this fight, and now they were changing their approach. Then he saw them. A new type of Zenrath soldier, taller, heavier armored, standing in a rigid formation at the edge of the battlefield. Their armor pulsed with an eerie, shifting glow, different from the others. Ethan fired. The silent round hit dead center. The Zenrath barely flinched. His stomach dropped. It's happening again, Carter said, voice tight. They've adapted. Vasquez swore under her breath. I need to get a closer look at that armor. Ethan fired again, adjusting for a weak point. The round cracked through, the Zenrath staggered, but it didn't go down. Instead, it turned, slow and deliberate, its unreadable gaze locking onto Ethan's position. Then it pointed. A second later, the building erupted in fire. The blast tore through the building like a thunderclap, sending concrete and steel shrapnel in every direction. Ethan barely had time to react before the shockwave hit, throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, lungs burning from the dust that filled the air like a suffocating fog. Somewhere to his left, Carter was coughing, struggling to push himself upright. Vasquez groaned from beneath a collapsed section of the rooftop. Ethan scrambled toward her, ignoring the ache in his ribs, and helped lift the debris just enough for her to crawl free. Blood ran down the side of her face, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. "They knew exactly where we were," she said, her voice hoarse. Ethan didn't respond. He already knew. The Zenrath had adapted again, and this time, it wasn't just their armor. They had learned how to track the snipers, pinpointing their positions with terrifying efficiency. The silent shots had given humanity a brief advantage, but the enemy was evolving too fast. A deep, metallic howl echoed through the ruined cityscape, a sound Ethan had never heard before. He turned, scanning the battlefield through the dust and fire. The new Zenrath units were advancing, their armor shifting like liquid metal, pulsing with an energy that absorbed even the most devastating attacks. They moved in formation, precise and unyielding. Bullets still bounced harmlessly off them. Even the silent rounds, when they landed, no longer resulted in instant kills. The first shot staggered them. The second barely slowed them down. By the third, they had already locked onto the sniper's position. Humanity's best weapon had just lost its edge. Carter pressed a hand to his earpiece. "Command, this is Sierra 2. We've got a problem. The new Zenrath units are..." He stopped. The voice on the other end wasn't Captain Rhodes. It wasn't human at all. The transmission was filled with an eerie resonant static, layered with something deeper. Something almost like a whisper, threading through the interference. A voice that wasn't speaking words, but was still somehow understood. Vasquez paled. "They're in the comms." Ethan felt the weight of it settle over him like a stone in his chest. The Zenrath had cracked their encrypted frequencies. They weren't just jamming transmissions. They were listening, learning. And now they were speaking. The whispering grew louder, shifting into something more coherent. A single phrase, repeated in a distorted, inhuman voice. "We see you." The radio cut out. For the first time since the invasion began, a cold thread of fear wormed its way into Ethan's gut. The Zenrath had never tried to communicate before. Not in any way humans could understand. They had arrived, waged war, slaughtered millions without a single declaration or demand. Until now. The ground beneath them trembled. In the distance, the Zenrath war machines were shifting their formation, consolidating. Falling back but not in retreat. Something else was happening. Ethan lifted his scope, adjusting for clarity. What he saw chilled him to the bone. The Zenrath weren't just regrouping. They were deploying. Large, obelisk-like structures were being placed at key locations across the battlefield, each one pulsing with an unnatural rhythmic glow. The realization hit Vasquez first. "That's not a weapon," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's a transmitter." Ethan frowned. "For what?" The answer came seconds later. Across the city, people began to collapse. Soldiers, civilians, anyone within range of the obelisks. Some dropped instantly, unconscious before they hit the ground. Others convulsed violently, their limbs twitching as if being pulled by invisible strings. And then they stood up again. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was subtle at first. The way they moved just slightly off. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their eyes, once filled with fear or determination, now empty, glassy. Then the first one turned and fired. A human soldier, moments ago an ally, lifted his weapon and gunned down his squad mates without hesitation. More followed. The battlefield erupted into chaos, not just between humans and Zenrath, but humans and humans. The obelisks weren't weapons in the conventional sense. They were broadcasting something. A signal. A frequency that overrode the brain's natural control, turning living people into extensions of the Zenrath's will. A biological weapon, without ever needing a single physical alteration. Vasquez was already working furiously on her tablet, scanning the transmission. "It's a neural override," she said. "They've hijacked the human nervous system. No implants, no infection, just raw signal manipulation." Ethan felt ice in his veins. "Can we stop it?" Vasquez hesitated, then shook her head. "Not from the ground. The source is, she stopped, staring at the data. It's coming from orbit. Ethan didn't need to ask what that meant. The Zenrath command ship, the massive war vessel that had loomed in the skies since the invasion began, wasn't just their base of operations. It was the source. The master signal. The only way to stop it was to take out the ship. Carter swallowed hard. So what? We send up a strike team? Blow the thing from the inside. Vasquez grimaced. No time. The override is spreading fast. In a few hours, half the planet could be under their control. We need to cut the signal now. Ethan exhaled slowly. He already knew what she was going to say next. We take the shot, she confirmed. It was insane. No sniper had ever made a shot like that before. The command ship was miles above the atmosphere, a moving target, heavily shielded. Even if the silent railgun had the range, the calculations would have to be perfect. Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded. Vasquez relayed coordinates, adjusting for planetary curvature, wind resistance, gravitational pull. Carter double-checked every number. There was no margin for error. Ethan positioned himself, steadied his breathing, and aimed toward the sky. Carter exhaled. No pressure. Ethan fired. The rifle was silent, but in that moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The projectile tore through the atmosphere, a needle of raw velocity slicing upward toward the sky. Ethan kept his eye pressed to the scope, watching, calculating, knowing there was no second shot. This had to be perfect. Vasquez's fingers danced over her tablet, tracking the trajectory, running numbers in real time. Carter, usually quick with a remark, said nothing. He just stared upward, waiting, hoping. The Zenrath command ship loomed in the heavens, a monolith of dark metal against the burning sky. Its shields shimmered faintly, a protective barrier that had rendered Earth's missiles and orbital defenses useless. No warhead had ever gotten close. But this wasn't a warhead. This was something smaller, faster, something the Zenrath hadn't accounted for. The seconds stretched into eternity. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. The rifle, experimental as it was, had never been tested at this distance. The margin for error was so infinitesimal that even a fraction of a degree off would send the shot hurtling into the void. Then a flicker. A shift. The command ship's shields reacted, too late. The projectile punched through, a silent lance of kinetic energy tearing into the ship's hull. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a rupture split across the surface like a wound, glowing veins of energy spiderwebbing outward. The ship trembled. And then, a blinding explosion. The Zenrath command ship shuddered violently, its sleek structure twisting as internal detonations ripped through its core. Pieces of its hull tore away, fragments burning as they fell toward the planet. The eerie hum of the obelisks cut off all at once. And just like that, the battlefield changed. The human soldiers who had been turned into mindless weapons staggered, collapsing as if waking from a nightmare. Their eyes, once glassy and vacant, filled with confusion, horror. Some dropped their weapons immediately. Others, realizing what they had done, fell to their knees. The Zenrath, however, reacted differently. Their ranks, once unshakable, broke. Without the command ship's presence, they faltered, movements losing the eerie precision that had made them unstoppable. They hesitated, glancing toward the sky as if waiting for orders that would never come. And then they ran. Across the battlefield, the once invincible enemy turned and retreated. The towering new units, the heavily armored elites. They moved with urgency now, abandoning their positions, their formations unraveling. Without the signal guiding them, they were no longer an unbreakable force. They were just soldiers, and soldiers could lose. A roar of defiant triumph rose from the human ranks. The tide had turned and they knew it. Ethan exhaled, lowering the rifle. His hands were steady, but the weight of what had just happened pressed into his chest. He had taken the shot. The shot that changed everything. Carter let out a breathless laugh. Hell of a shot, Hayes. Vasquez was still staring at the sky, watching as the last remnants of the command ship burned. It worked, she murmured, almost in disbelief. We actually did it. Ethan didn't answer. He was watching the battlefield, watching the Zenrath as they withdrew. This wasn't just a retreat. It was something else. Something calculated. They'll be back, he said finally. Vasquez nodded grimly. Yeah. But next time they'll know we can kill them. Ethan lifted his rifle, watching the horizon where the last of the Zenrath forces disappeared into the ruins. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since the invasion began, humanity had done more than just survive. They had won.